Lars. Different in some ways now from his Tekken 7 self. Still though, as they say, the more things change, the more they stay the same. This is the Good Strings series, where out of hundreds of moves in Tekken, we shrink things down to bite-sized chunks to help you learn a character or to add something to your game. And you have chosen my main in Tekken 7 and in 8, Lars Alexanderson, Secret Son of Zeus. You have chosen well, young Kimosabi. Timestamps below. We're going to be looking at a number of things today in a unique way catered to Lars. Strings, strats, frames. Don't worry if you don't know frame data. I'll also be explaining this in such a way that you will get it. Absolute beginner guide in the right upper hand corner, and begin. Lars being a military man, I'd figure we'd start with range. Up close and personal with Alert L, known in Tekken 8 as an unlisted down forward 1. This is a 13 frame attack, a fast mid. In fact, Lars' fastest mid attack in the game without a stance that allows you to block safely if you don't score the hit. This is a check to your opponent, checking to make sure they respect your buttons up close and don't feel comfortable throwing out slower animation moves. Just checking to make sure they understand that you are establishing your position. Like with Horeng here, for example, with the infamous smash low right, down 3-4. Or Brian's chopping elbow. If you're new to Lars, do not neglect this move. Alert L is +5 on hit. Take those frames, take that number, and add it to your opponent's next attack, making their next move slower, making it take more time to impact. And Alert L, -1 on block. This means you can beat out your opponent's fastest mid attacks with your fastest high attacks. This is a Tekken fundamental that can be applied across the board with characters with a move that's -1 on block, and you should definitely be using it with Lars. The caveat for Alert L is this. At the start of rounds, this fast mid attack, 13 frames, can be beaten by an opponent's fastest high attack. In with or without a one jab anchoring it on a blocking opponent, giving Lars' next move a little attack advantage when doing so, Alert L is steppable to the enemy's right shoulder. And unless you're really right up next to the opposition, Alert L hitting that walk right will still make the next attempt whiff. So be sure to be face to face if enemies are prone to sidestep attempts. Alert L can be stepped to the left if Lars and his opponent are fighting in a phone booth, but can clip if your enemy is further out. Whether down forward 1 is blocked, hits, or is anchored by a blocked one jab, enemies will still be clipped if they step to their left. Unless the one jab is done really up close, or it's a character with a sidestep like Lily. It's a superpower of hers, and she can circumvent a lot of these rules. In the story of Tekken, Lars and Kaz may have a bloodline feud, but Lily may be Lars' true rival in this game. She gives him a lot of problems. Just be aware. Anyway, let's look at some applications for this strike. You can do a lot with down forward 1. In fact, it can help you set up your entire close range offense and quickly assess how your opponent likes to play. Alert L on hit, netting Lars an advantage of +5. Going into another Alert L is relatively safe, contained offense to commit to. It gives you time to defend against power crushes, or even duck one if you know the hit properties of the attack and have a read on it incoming. Quick recap. You hit your opponent with this move. Lars gets to move first. And as mentioned in the weapons guide, you can go into left-right combo or magnetic knee after that, which is a favorable trade against an enemy's fast attack, and counter hit against any other linear attack that's not a power crush. Flash Bullet, and we'll come back to this move later, is a pretty quick attack. We'll beat out a fast strike in this situation for a counter hit. And you can follow up with whatever silent entry options your heart desires. And if you want to get really cheeky on a read of an incoming power crush, both Lars Avalanche, aka Demon Flip options can circumvent some power crushes. But again, this might be a little too style over substance here, and too much of a risk. Though, as all Lars mains know, the developers seem to always want Lars to be dancing on a razor's edge. They like making Lars and Risk one and the same. Now Alert L on block, -1, a minuscule disadvantage that adds just one more frame. One more bit of animation time for Lars' next attack. Be sure to take note of what your enemy returns when this move is blocked. They may throw out a fast mid of their own, which means Delta Slicer. One of Lars' fastest high attacks, 10 frames, can beat out the enemy's mid attack and score you a counter hit Heat Engager. Ring Current and left-right combos are other attacks to place in this scenario. And we'll explore Ring Current a bit later. You can also dick jab here against a fast mid or fast high attack. Again, this type of action, minuscule minus frames, small recovery on a blocked move, continue to attack with a fast high or junk punch. These are fundamentals of Tekken. Study it, implement it, harass your opponent with it. And what Lars can do upon a successful junk punch is go for power split, full crouch, 2 button. Since you're already in crouch, this punch is easy to input after a successful dick jab. It's a safe on block, 15 frame, counter hit launcher. So you're gonna wanna try to place this move in as many places as you possibly can. So, Alert L blocked, and your enemy quickly conditioned into throwing out a fast high attack because let's just say you keep catching them with Delta Slicer when they go for something else. That greased lightning that Lars can be, and enemies hate, grants a possibility to be opened up here with Evasion. Let's start with something very deadly, dangerous, and therefore exciting. Perhaps Lars' best panic move, Lightning Screw, up 4-3. This was covered in the weapons guide, but just to reiterate for those who didn't watch that video, this attack is highly evasive and will go underneath a jab, granting you a combo path. But unless your life bar is about to be depleted, this is betting your life on an unnecessary Hail Mary. -26 on block, Lars can be launched and eviscerated. However, it's in Lars' design to play risky. It makes him exciting to pilot, but you don't have to do this. And I personally wouldn't recommend just throwing this move out just because. If you really have a great read on an opposing fighter, or if you're about to die and you want to take a chance on it, fine. But if not in a dire situation, there are so many better options here that don't require an all or nothing approach. Like Inductance, down back 1+2. Inductance sways back to avoid a high attack and some fast mids after something like Alert L blocked. In some cases, depending on if the strike does not merely punish your opponent's move, but rather scores a counter hit. Pressing down here, Lars will shift to dynamic entry, and double barrel heat engager becomes inescapable for the enemy. You can also take this counter hit and instead of going into stance, go into any of the fast high attacks we've covered so far. And these two, in this counter hit situation, are inescapable for the opposing party. All this sounding nice and good upon a successful read of an opponent's movement, nonetheless is still not risk-free, and Lars is -13 if inductance doesn't hit. He cannot safely block if the enemy blocks inductance in turn. More than likely when it comes to evasion, however, you'll turn to a move that is the embodiment of Lars' attack design. Dangerous to use, rewarding to use. Shadow Cutter, down back 4. As you probably know, Lars dies if this is blocked. You probably see a trend forming here when it comes to some of his attacks, but not using this move, just out in the open, can help hide its usage, surprising the enemy, as it's too fast for the human eye to react to and has to be anticipated. So disguising this move behind Alert L blocked can catch an opponent throwing out a high attack. Shadow Cutter evades highs completely. It's a counter hit launcher. It's +5 on hit, which is good advantage, and forces your opponent into crouch, setting up Lars' offensive actions so nicely. Here too is a relatively safe place for Power Spike. These two moves, Shadow Cutter hit into Power Spike, is a good tester/conditioner for what your opponent does next. If they ignore your advantage, and let's face it, this is Tekken 8, so there will be mashers. Power Spike will make them pay. Counter hit launcher, do your combo. We will look at Lars' combos in a dedicated video later on. Time-wise, such a feature just wouldn't fit this guide. But as I said, Shadow Cutter, as risky as it is to use, especially if you abuse it, is still one of Lars' best weapons to open up his opponent. So much so, we have to look at variation. Let's keep Power Spike as our launching pad for the rest of this. Remember, Shadow Cutter forces enemies to crouch down. They may not have access to Power Crush in this immediate aftermath here. If they try and wait until they're standing again and then mash into Power Crush, they will most likely be hit or counter hit as they simply don't have the time to get the move out. Though distance to the opponent can play a role here, and when your opponent can start to input their Power Crush. To put this simply, there are characters who these rules don't apply to because they can input their Power Crush from a crouched state, like Heihachi here and Nina. Though safe to block against Heihachi, with Nina, you cannot go from Shadow Cutter into the spike with her. Nina's Power Crush Heat Engager will strike you. Use while rising 4, Shell Smash, instead to be safe, double smack for damage, wait and block her Power Crush instead to launch her with Blue Bolt, or grab her with something. To cover this particular matter fully, the same approach can be done against Heihachi as well. Characters like Heihachi and Nina aside, you may find, however, one of the ways combatants really give Lars trouble is just block. Just stand block. Don't challenge this in any way. So we have to make them want to challenge. Double smack, as I just mentioned, is the pimp hand to the opponent's kneecaps that avoids high attacks. While crouching 1+2 can make enemies frustrated that they are unwilling to protect their feet. Low attack into low attack always places this into an enemy's mind. And there's just enough time here for an opponent to recover back up to stand and light up the starting frames of either a heat burst or power crush, both of which get snuffed out by double smack. Remember, we're using Power Spike as a springboard to condition and illustrate our options against a stand blocking opponent. However, while we're here, let's look at an enemy's while rising options against double smack if they opt for such a thing. Mainly, their fastest move in this state, while rising 4. This will beat out double smack even with the advantage of Shadow Cutter backing it up. But if you start to see this type of action, go right back to Power Spike. The double smack attack is only -12 on block, which means most adversaries are locked into dishing out a small punish, but a punish nonetheless. This move can be low parried, of course, and even in this Shadow Cutter scenario, it can be hop kicked. Again, if this happens a few times in a match, go back to Power Spike to catch your opponent in the air for a little mini combo. On double smack hit, Lars is +1, small attack advantage, and Lars will stand, but advantage to choose to start this cycle with fast highs or go for the relatively small risk down for 1 all over again. I won't be going into everything Lars can do from Shadow Cutter hit, instead focusing on that stand blocking opponent for the sake of time and to push against information overload in this big ass guide. That being said, Tower Cannon, a high attack while rising 3 and pressing down to shift to limited entry, is a great answer to a stand blocking opponent. Lars has hit them and now is oppressing them, and after which they have to make a decision, a 50-50 guess on these two moves from limited entry stance. With Lars shifting after Tower Cannon, he's +4 on block. Not only does he get to move first from limited entry stance, but both of his options, Blasting Smack and Rising Force, evade high attacks. If the opponent opts for fast mid, Lars having that +4 attack advantage, most opponents will get hit first. If the character has a 12 frame mid, the fastest type of standing mid in the game, then Lars' limited entry options will tie. Getting cheeky, Lars can loop Tower Cannon over and over, prompting your opponent to stop merely standing there and press a button against it. This is a slower move, so they can knock you out of this with a mid strike. But Tower Cannon can evade some high attacks, seemingly depending on the opponent and distance, as you can see here. And Father Heihachi seems to be able to just jab his son out altogether. That little rabbit hole aside, Tower Cannon is a launcher. All this oppressive high action may prompt enemies to duck. Cue mid options like Rising Force here. Additional notes to keep in mind with all we just went through. You do have to watch out for those who can parry Tower Cannon and Power Spike. Storm Axle, being an aerial attack however, can't be parried by the Limb Snatchers. But keep in your head, Shadow Cutter into Power Spike. Really hunt for this move. This is something to fish for when facing a new opponent. See if they press. To be clear, all of these high and mid attacks we've covered so far can be used on their own. You don't have to look to go into them from another branching attack. With that in mind, let's explore these fast strings that can do plenty of work all on their own and connect well with other attacks themselves. In this case, we're going to revisit left-right combo and ring current. Both featured in the weapons vid, we will cover them more in depth, in the difference between the two and their relation to the opponent. But before we do that though, we have to look at the brief but powerful change to Delta Slicer. A move some would say was Lars' best attack in Tekken 7, and with the changes from patch 1.08, Delta Slicer is back in style. Initially, this move without heat left your opponent standing, forced into a crouch, as you see here, and didn't wall splat. Now Delta Slicer has regained its wall splat properties as it once held in Tekken 7, and even when Lars gains his heat state next to a wall, Delta will splat the opponent. Delta also knocks down now, scoring the entire string of hits without heat attached, teeing up some nice ground game Lars can apply to his opponents, pressing a button off the floor. We won't be going through all things ground game today, but both dynamic entry rimfire and silent entry electric volley are great options against wake up mid kick, and rimfire will also catch a wake up low as well. Left-right combo is a standard 2-high punch attack, quintessential basic punisher when it comes to an enemy strike that's -10 frames or more. If your opponent throws out any attack that is unsafe and that leaves them standing next to you after, you can hit them with left-right combo, and it's minimal risk in terms of its speed. Now, let's go into the caveat. The risk of this attack is against all the moves in this game that crush, evade, and circumvent high strikes. Round starts in themselves are a particular thing, and how your character's fastest attacks, like left-right combo, play a role in them. An opponent going for a slower move, of course Lars, theoretically is supposed to win out this encounter. However, whatever luck the netcode feels like divvying up that day aside, the move of the opposition can have swayback properties despite being slower. Dragunov, for instance, even has a power crush that does this. So watch out for these evasive types of actions from the enemy as the round gets going. Supplement this string for down forward 1 in some cases, or for the slightly slower but longer reach flashback. I promise this move gets covered in this guide. And be careful of those who can parry punches. A threatening dash block that is moving towards your opponent with a quick forward and then holding back for dear life may help you discern how your opponent likes to play and bait out a misguided parry attempt. Left-right com is a linear tool and can be sidestepped to your opponent's right. Though Lars' second strike can still catch those moving right sometimes. And that second punch can clip those stepping to their left. And of course, the string can be ducked. 1,000 moves in this game. String by string, you can discover if an enemy is able to block after or not by using left-right combo. If the disadvantage is minimal, ops will be able to duck and launch despite this relatively safe test. Again, supplement left-right with down forward 1 instead to see if the enemy move is at least -13, while adding a bit more safety, as of course alert L, being a mid, cannot be ducked. Left-right combo +8 on hit, great advantage. As mentioned in the weapons vid, tactical sword, magnetic knee are great options here. They cannot be sidestepped or walked after left-right hits. but fall to Power Crush. In Power Crush, buffed in Tekken 8, has a big usage in ranked, and seemingly in tournament, just overall more of a usage in this game. 1-2 jab into 1-2 jab knocks enemies out of their Power Crush. Left-right combo hit into left L does this as well. And with so much advantage from left-right combo, Flash Bullet knocks enemies out of their Power Crush too. Left-right and follow-ups becomes more about knowing your opponent the more in depth you go. A grab here can be appropriate against Power Crushes that don't swing back. This will also catch a heat burst. And Shadow Cutter against these two options on a read is a good attack to invest in. Remember, disguising Shadow Cutter the best you can makes it harder for the enemy to anticipate its usage. Left-right combo being -3 if the enemy blocks it. This is a movement/attack disadvantage that is small enough Lars can sidestep a linear attack and throw out Delta Slicer in a search for a counter hit. These two punches can be used as an approaching tool, not a get-in tool. You can't be at a great distance from your opponent, but closing in on them. Both these punches are 10 frames. That means they're both really fast and can clip someone throwing out a stronger, though albeit slower button. Once again, you may find opponents hit with something like left-right. They just hold back. They just block. Even though Lars has plenty of attack options when this string hits, your enemy isn't really forced or hastened to make a decision right then and there. There is no mix for our mix character in that immediate moment on what to do next. Lars' other 10 frame, fast punishing string makes enemies do just that in spades. Ring current, 2-1, 10 frames, high mid. There is a built-in delay in this attack. Second hit is 20 frames, a longer animation to impact. So if blocked, it looks like it can be interrupted or sidestepped in between the first and this second portion, but it cannot. An opponent able to bring a reckoning by ducking ring current, it is possible for the enemy to duck the initial volley and catch you in between the first and second strikes of this attack. But it has to be done flash quick, anticipating this move. And even a small hesitation on a junk punch is too slow. So more than likely, enemies will be counter hit by ring current instead. This is quite a strong, safe string to go for. On regular hit or counter hit, ring current is +8. Great advantage. Lars shifts to limited entry, where your opponent must play the 50-50 game between blasting smack, a low, and rising force, a mid. Ring current is the high-octane offensive power Tekken 8 is all about. You search for its usage the same way as left-right combo or any other fast attack as a punishing move. Reina has Flash Punch at 10 frames. Jin has Switchblade at 10 frames. In this fighting game of 50-50 setups and guesses that everyone seems to have, ring current is the one that belongs to Lars. This is one of those rare cases where I get to say, this is safe for Lars at -6 on block, and extremely dangerous for the enemy if he gets the hit. Extraordinarily advantageous for Lars. In fact, you would be doing yourself a disservice not to implement this in your game. Even if a move is more than -10, think like 12 up to 13 frames. You may want to go for ring current if you know your opponent does not deal with the massive mix of weapons Lars has access to here. Many more than just limited entry, blasting smack, and rising force. and we'll get to that in just a minute. Ring current blocked by your opponent. You can still press against a high attack, as you may recall in the evasion section of the video. Both blasting smack and rising force evade high strikes. This is another risky play for Lars, suspecting an opposing fighter might stick with a high attack after blocking ring current. You can make them pay for their false sense of safety. At this point, appearing to be a button mashing freak that doesn't understand the game, pressing after your attack string has been blocked. Little do they know, you have more cunning to be strange. Only appearing to be crazy, prompting opponents, baiting them after they block ring current to throw out a mid-strike you may very well be able to punish. Ring current is a premier move that tells you how your opponent likes to play. A thought, a tactic, a rule to keep in mind is that some enemies get very confused by Lars in ways that they don't even notice, and may treat getting hit by ring current with the same remedy as if they blocked it, conditioned to go for the same move that knocks Lars out of his follow-up attacks, regardless of if they've been hit or not. An opponent's fast-hitting low or junk punch is a great example of this. If you observe that these methods are the chosen way your opponent deals with ring current on hit and or block, look for Storm Axle, aka Orbital Heal, under these circumstances. A little special side note here, because Tekken is full of nuance, big things that can be easy to miss. I'll use Lars V Dragunov here as an example in regards to ring current into Orbital Heal. If blocked, just like everybody else, Sergei goes for a high attack, blasting and rising force hits, prompting the Dragunov player to go for a mid attack instead, down forward 1. Lars can take tide turning advantage against this with his Orbital Heal. With the angle of Dragunov's strike, coupled with the angle of Lars' airborne attack, the punch misses, and Lars scores a launcher. This ring current blocked into Orbital evades every 13 frame down forward 1 in the game. It's also evasive towards 13 frame mid kicks, as well as some 12 frame mids with small hitboxes. This ring current into Storm Axle can be downright silly in its evasive properties. So enemies can't just press when blocking here. They have to pick the proper option or else. If Lars hits Sergei with ring current and then goes for the orbital, he'll be knocked out before the move can hit. Tekken is crazy like that. Ring current can clip those sidewalking to their left, evade it if they go right, but this string is really for punishing an opponent to gain access to those limited entry options and beyond. Keep in mind, though the smack is a low, and people tend to hop kick low attacks if they think one is on the way, the attack advantage, or the placement of disadvantage on your opponent from being hit by ring current is so much of a burden, your opponent's hop kick won't have time to even leave the ground. Rising Force, a move that makes Lars airborne. Some heat bursts can send him crashing to the ground, granting an enemy a combo, depending on what move you used prior to Rising Force, how much attack advantage Lars has before he uses this move, and the timing of your opponent's heat burst press. For instance, after Ark Combination, a string we will explore on its own right in this guide, this string hits the opponent, shifts to limit entry, and Rising Force. Opposing fighter replies with heat burst activation, and Lars can get comboed. After ring current, Rising Force, this interaction can change, actually knocking some opponents out of their burst. But again, timing plays a factor. This clearly isn't one size fits all, and will require you to study up on individual matchups and adjust your attack game plan accordingly. But now you know these things are possible. Waiting a sec. After Lars dips into limited entry, he will then be in a while rising state, accessing tools like While Rising 2, once called Lightning Starter in Tekken 7, and other strikes like Streamer, While Rising 1. For other moves here like Tower Cannon or Shell Smack, you don't have to wait for that little sec for Lars to exit limited entry. You have immediate access to them the moment your input is pressed. If you're a beginner with Lars, practice Lightning Starter in Streamer from Recon. Get used to this delay of pressing the 1 button and the 2 button after going into limited. So instead of getting Blasting Smack or Rising Force, Lars performs the While Rising moves instead. If you wait too long, Lars will stand back up and throw out jabs. Even if you have to drill this for a day or two, practice this delay until you have a natural feel for it. And because there are so many options Lars can do here, we have to look at variation. Our launching pad will be Recon, of course. Here in Tekken 8, Masher's Paradise. People like to press. Even after being hit, people press. With that in mind, the first option I want to look at is While Rising 4, Shell Smash, an 11-frame kick. The fastest While Rising attack Lars has that acts as a check against an enemy pressing after recurrent hits. Again, this is a mid-check, checking to see what the enemy likes to do after being hit. They may try to power crush or heat burst. Nope, they can't do that. They get snuffed out. They may very well press a button or attempt to sidestep, in which not even the almighty pretty face and thin waist of Lily can get away from this kick. In checking Shell Smash against the Parry posse in Yossi's Flash, seemingly everyone gets hit before their maneuver takes action. As far as I can tell, this kick is the mega safe button after recurrent hits. Except for the curious case of Jin Kazama. He can parry this kick. It's a timing thing, of course, but he can parry several actions out of recurrent. So delay your timing here if you suspect a parry incoming, or go for a low attack. If an adversary blocks this kick, you are safe to block yourself, Shell Smash being -6. Something that will undoubtedly help you improve in ranked as a Tekken player is taking into account how many other players of your character like to play. I'll probably say this a few times on the channel, but opponents aren't just conditioned by you, but by every other Lars they faced before you. And as Lars players who really want to open up our opponent, Blasting Smack, however you get there, is a great way to do that. But it may also be expected. This is paying attention. This is taking note of an opponent that preemptively ducks, expecting Blasting Smack. That is where Streamer, While Rising 1, relatively quick mid-launcher, comes into play. Because of that low-hitting threat, which has your opponent turtling up, not pressing, not moving, in this game of high usage rate of buttons, and they're not pressing anything, it hypercharges the power of Streamer. As failing the 50-50 guessing game, they have to eat a whole combo. Taking a few of these to the chin, adversaries may willingly go back to eating that low, or at least attempt to be more tactical in their defensive choices. Streamer though a deadly weapon, isn't a perfect one. It can be sidestepped and walked to the enemy's left, loses to Power Crush, can be punished by Heat Burst, and is minus 12 if the opposition holds Fast Hope and Stand Guards. So Lars can be hit. Not launched, but hit. But remember, this is predicated off of an enemy's duck, that threat of a low attack, and sticking with that threat, we'll look at Glassbreaker. While rising 2-3, press down to shift to limited entry. This shift also ensures Lars' safety, as though minus 11 on block. By Lars dipping down in distance, he can escape being hit by a high attack, and this is safe to block against mid attacks. If you're new to Lars, you may misinput this move as 2-button, down button, instead of 2-3, then down button. Make sure you focus on that. While rising, 2-3, then down. Practice this over and over again. Make sure you get this move on your toolbelt. Glassbreaker, mid-high, 13 frames, starts with a fast mid known as Lightning Starter that can be used in its own right in the open field of play. But here, you want to remain safe with a mid attack and potentially keep your offense going instead of fishing for a launcher or knocking your enemy away with Rising Force. That's what Glassbreaker is for. +6 on hit with the shift to limited entry. There are so many mid options here. Bolstered by the 2 low attacks of Double and Blasting Smack. Another great place to try for Power Spike. If enemies don't respect you, get to move first after you hit them. And if you go low with Blasting Smack, in this situation, you can loop this whole scenario all over again. That split second that it takes you to get into Glassbreaker from Ring Current may make you a bit uncomfortable, like there's an opening for Lars to get hit, unless you really delay your Glassbreaker input. That vulnerability isn't really there, with the exception I'll explain in just a minute. But what I want you to take away from this is this. Remember, Ring Current hit. Enemies that do not press here do this because they expect and respect the Blasting Smack low. Lars thrives on conditioning his opponent, which creates the respect that he needs in order to mix, which is his entire game plan. Condition, Blasting Smack. Respect, they don't press. They maneuver to block a low that isn't there. And voila, you have your mix. Enemies that block the string are free to try to interrupt the first and second hit of Glassbreaker, which is a high attack. But they'll be counter hit for their trouble. They can dig jab, avoiding the high attack, or power crush to end your turn. Or duck the high and launch you. But all of Lars' options here, that will only become probable on repeated and therefore predictable use of these strikes like a flowchart. So watch out for that. Ring Current and then Glassbreaker hit, this can knock every opponent out of their power crush, regardless of their startup frames. I tested this against every single fighter in the game, but this has to be done like frame perfect as soon as you have access to your While Rising options. That coupled with, online netcode. Don't rely on these two connecting attacks together as a power crush or heat burst stopper. It's too frivolous, in my opinion. But the Lars games continues. He has a mix with Lightning Starter while Rising 2. He can either go for Glassbreaker, mid-high, or Multiplied Force. mid-mid, forcing the enemy into a crouch whether on hit or block. +2 on hit, a small gain for Lars, a great time to test the waters with Delta Slicer against an enemy's fastest while rising attack, or a down forward 1 if you think they'll go for something a bit slower. Multiplied force, -12 on block, unsafe. You can be hit, but you cannot be launched. Both these strings, Glassbreaker and Multiplied, are natural combos, meaning if you get the first hit, you're guaranteed to get the second. They both can knock adversaries out of their power crush upon great input, and the second strike of Multiplied Force knocks down on counter hit for those who think you're going for something else, or they're just confused and they try to dick jab you. There's always nuance to Tekken though, as just like the Matrix, some of its rules can be bent and some broken. Leo, for instance, the forgotten one. Their swayback attack, aside from blasting smack, can evade the majority of Lars' mid-high options from limited entry / crouch stance. With Shell Smash seemingly being the most reliable here. This is a timing thing. Leo may also be hit depending on when moves are pressed, respective of both parties. But I put this here so you know, you're always learning in Tekken. It's a never-ending ceiling. There's always something that can get out of a thing, so you have to go and learn another thing. Once again, exploring an enemy's power crush and heat burst options after being hit by ring current, you can grab, going for hostile takedown that will leave an enemy at your feet, or apocalypse to knock them away. The grabs becoming unbreakable, of course, against power crush and heat burst. Going into lightning starter and pressing down, Lars will lightning skate away from an enemy and shift to dynamic entry stance. I won't be going over all that encompasses the stance at the moment, save a cheeky thing Lars can do here is Into the Storm, double barrel, or rimfire to evade some strikes and power crushes if an opponent, especially a blocking opponent, overextends. The 1 button, an elbow attack from dynamic entry, is only 11 frames. It hits fast and recovers fast, so even if it whiffs, you may very well have time to block. These setups vary, but this move, if nothing else, helps you put distance between yourself and the opponent if you desire some space, though I personally search for Into the Storm here. The reason though your opponent may press here is instead of lightning skating away from them, they think you'll go into lightning starter forward for silent entry options. In regard to Wild Rising 2, into silent entry. This is one of several moves that go into this type of action that isn't a tried and true mix-up, implementing it on a blocking opponent. They have more options than Lars does here, but Lars can still win out despite it all. This fake mix-up scenario deserves its own video on why Lars can struggle here and in various other areas. I will be making a video on this, so watch out for that. But I will say this, and again, explore it in depth in a future video. Lars going into silent entry against the blocking opponent. However you get there, the mix of turbine hook, a low, and lightning thrust, a mid, 2 premier moves from this stance. Lars can be knocked out of silent entry before these moves come out. That's when Even on a blocking opponent, Electric Volley can make this mix deadly, winnable against an attacking enemy while Lars is locked in silent entry. Do not neglect this 17 frame move. That is pretty fast for a power crush, and though it is duckable, you can now at least fend for yourself going into silent entry against a blocking enemy. To cap this off, I'm going to make sure you understand. After Recon, you do have your silent entry options, your wild rising options. That very much gives you enough to think about in the trial and error with their implementation. But you do have a few more options as well you can pull in from a few places. Remember Power Spike and Double Smack from Crouch. And as Lars moves into a standing position, you can implement Cross Transistor and Red Sprite to keep your offense going. Little note here, holding down going into limited entry, you can delay the stance before applying your mix-up here. With all of these different paths using Recon, then while rising, play and counterplay, it may take you a while to figure out what type of offense you want to make out of all of this, going for plus frames into plus frames, mixing mids and lows from limited entry and crouch, fishing for launchers, scouting for crushes, or playing it safe to see how your enemy reacts. It's your Lars. There's lots of style. Mix it up. Don't be hesitant to try different things. Pilot your Lars your way. Before we move on to exploring some more moves, I'm going to place a challenge here for you beginner to intermediate Lars players. Let's just say you punish an opponent with left-right combo over the course of a few rounds, and they just hold back. Enemy thoughts may be, it's Lars. If I block a low, he dies. Thus, he's not going to throw out a low, so I'll just keep stand blocking. Red Sprite, while running 3, can help you put on the pressure and give Lars additional advantage. The least fussy way I know to implement this is forward, forward plus 3. Whatever little trick you may find, just get it done. And don't worry about your speed of one move into the next. I just want you to start getting used to executing this while running move this way. Red Sprite knocking down a hit, Lars will be +6 on a blocking enemy. You've gone from left-right landing, gaining great attack advantage, to Red Sprite blocked and still retaining pretty good attack advantage. Lars gets to move first again, extending your offensive turn. We're really going to build Lars into a demon here. Plus frame, true 50-50s, meaning placing your adversaries in a position where they truly have to guess what you're going to do next into more plus frame guessing situations. This next move, one of Lars' best in my opinion, can be used all on its own or in a portion in a rolling train of 50-50s. Enter Gilbert Smash, back 2-1. A 15 frame attack, pretty good speed, 2 mid punches. Back 2 by itself is +4 on hit. Such attack advantage, allowing you to pull the plug on an enemy's power crush going into left-right comp, or safely checking with alert L. Back 2 is -7 on block. Lars can block safely after this. Landing this whole string, Lars is still +4. Now this is where the oddity of Tekken starts to Tekken and seemingly gives us insight to how the developers sculpted Lars to be played. Both strikes of Gil Smash hit. Lars has that +4 attack advantage. Going for something like Alert L here will beat out an enemy's fastest high attack. In conventional wisdom, Lars' quickest high attacks, coupled with that attack advantage, should also win out, going up against an enemy's fast high attacks. But after Gilbert's smash, they do not. Lars does move first. His jab will reach out before his opponents, but it will whiff, and Lars will be counter hit by every single character in the game, throwing out a 10-frame fast attack. It's because of the spacing Gilbert Smash creates upon hit. Whether at tip range or up close, if out in the open, this gap between Lars and his opponent will exist, and if you mash either of Lars' left-handed fast attacks, that being Delta Slicer or left-right combo, and the enemy mashes just as fast, Lars will always be hit. If you go for ring current, that right hand has longer reach and will counter hit a mashing opponent. But that spacing that doesn't allow Lars certain hits can also be used heavily against opponents throwing out fast highs after Gilbert's smash connects. Their attack string can also whiff in the spacing if you only let them press first, creating a counter hit opportunity for a fighter that greatly benefits off of counter hits. Weapons like Ark Blast, Magnetic Knee, and Inductance. Some of these attacks not requiring Lars to backdash at all before going into them, though others may. They do, however, not only require a read on an opponent's next move, but also some of these options have to be done in between enemies' attack strings. You have to shoot the gap, like with Power Spike here. But seemingly, the devs crafted this attack string, Gilbert Smash, to work this way. I don't ever see Lars players really implement this move like this, but that doesn't mean Gilbert Smash wasn't meant to do so. I'm putting these options here on screen instead of in the caveat or when to use section because of the experimental whiff space this move seems designed to be, so feel free to try some of these things out. A few strong caveats here being, the timing you have to interrupt a fighter's attack string varies depending on the character, and in some cases can be quite strict if not non-existent, so knowing the matchup is crucial. And speaking of knowing the matchup, with some characters, interrupting their attack via this setup has to be done at the end of their string depending on the strike you choose to use, making this experimental and character specific as you seek out this setup. This is highly exploratory and not how this move is normally implemented, which is what I'm about to talk about right now. Two qualities about this attack that combined make it such a great move, one of Lars' best, is that second punch can be delayed and becomes a launcher on counter hit against an opponent that has blocked the first punch but presses against the second punch. So it is to your benefit to delay this string more than not, fishing for that counter hit. Upon landing it, Dynamic Entry Rimfire offers your most damaging combo path, but has to be implemented quickly in order to score the combo. Lars using this attack all on its own, out in open space. It covers a bit more distance than Alert L, though is also a bit slower. It is a relatively safe speed against an opponent's more dangerous buttons, and can check those dangerous buttons as well as enemy movement if you move along with them after Gilbert hits. Additionally, this is a good follow-up weapon from left-right combo. Opponent doesn't press buttons, waiting to take their turn, and you delay that second punch. You score Magnetic Knee or Alert L. It's the same deal. Delayed a bit, the string can break enemies out of their power crush. Delayed too much, the power crush will pull through. Gilbert Smash can be really powerful when used correctly. If you weren't using the string before, start now. To reiterate here, landing both strikes, remember that spacing it creates, allowing you to evade linear strikes with a sidestep and go into Gil Smash again in search of that counter hit. You are always hunting for that counter hit with this move. The warning label on this move is a quick one. Gilbert Smash is -10 on block. Unsafe, but minimal damage. However, be careful against Kazuya, Reina, Heihachi, who thrive on -10 moves to set up their big offense. This string, after one jab, can catch some characters moving left. But aside from that, Gilbert Smash is highly steppable and walkable to both sides. Double tap, down back 2-1. 15 frames, mid-mid. This is the same speed of things like Magnetic Knee and Gilbert Smash, but Lars advances forward, which can catch enemies moving in or attempting a button to move away from you. This is a mid-range get-in tool that covers a fair distance. Down back 2 by itself is +3, okay advantage, -8 if this doesn't hit, and Lars is safe to block. The whole string is +6 on hit, pretty fair advantage. And Lars is still safe when blocked at -8. Double tap can be walked left and right. After one jab, can catch enemies sidestepping and walking left, and enemies sidewalking right can also avoid these punches. When you want to move in on your opponent with a strike rather than just movement alone. Though movement alone can result in you getting clipped by something, you can't get counter hit by an attack. And you can simply block in the midst of the movement. Double tap allows you to move in with a chance of catching your opponent's maneuvers or their attack against you. Scoring this whole string and armed with +6 frames, Lars can go into his fastest high attacks to snuff out a power crush. Alert L to check and then safely block. And Charge Factor, a move we'll go over shortly, can also knock opponents out of power crush after double tap hits. A surprise from avalanche options may also work to keep your opponent on high alert, but yet so confused. Down back to forward grants +6 hitting an enemy, but there is no time to hit confirm. Oh, I got the hit, I'll shift and double up my attack advantage by pressing forward. Either you're doing the thing or you're not doing the thing. You have to commit. Whether on hit or block, this shift is quick enough to utilize Turbine Hook on an unsuspecting enemy. Remember though, on a blocking opponent, Lars can be knocked out of this stance. Insert Electric Volley here, to cover your ass. But if the blocking enemy's reaction time isn't too slow, or even if fast enough to just duck in time expecting Turbine, Lightning Thrust comes back around. Or you could play it unsafe and go for Rising Storm, a mid-launcher if you suspect they'll duck. But at -14, watch out for mirror matches in Brian Fury. Lars can be launched by them if Rising Storm is blocked. And to end this off, Turbine scored as a counter hit against Mashers in Mashers Paradise, of course, becomes a launcher. Remember, you can be hop kicked out of this shift, even on hit, going into Turbine Hook. You don't have the frames to make an enemy's feet stick to the ground. And as promised, we're now covering Flash Bullet, down 4-2. This is also a mid-range get-in tool and counter-hit tool that doesn't have quite the reach of something like Double Smack, but at 14 frames, it's just a little bit faster. Whether you hit an enemy or they block this strike, Lars shifts to silent entry stance, unless you hold back after down 4-2, wherein Lars won't shift. Again, this is a mid-range get-in tool, but this attack requires you to make a prompt decision in the thereafter. That being said, this move may very well become the strike you use the most when piloting Lars, because Flash Bullet is a prototypical information gathering round starter. As although there's a risk of being beaten to the punch by an enemy's faster attack, they don't have the time to do a slower move to launch you at the start of rounds, for the most part. You could supplement Flash Bullet with Alert L against Kazuya because the power of Abolishing Fist, if the round gods don't reward you your buttons first for whatever reason, as on paper, Flash and Abolishing are the exact same speed. But again, netcode can be iffy, watch out for that. But I'm going to stress, using Flash Bullet at the start of rounds really can tell you a lot about how your opponent likes to play. Something really crazy, unexpected, foolish, like Snake Edge, Harangue's low options, Dragunov's down 2, Lydia's 15-frame launcher, Flash Bullet beats them all to the punch. Now, not to say you win the fight against all options, but again, Flash Bullet at round start helps you to establish how the opposing player likes to play. They may very well start the round with attacks that are faster than Flash Bullet, but these attacks aren't particularly dangerous enough to melt your life bar, save for a few key matchups you want to keep aware of in the back of your mind. Scoring the hit and holding back, Lars is +1. Tiny attack advantage. Really, this is about the whiff space the hit creates, nullifying your advantage altogether when it comes to enemies that are literally arm's reach away who have longer arms or punch length than Lars. Just like with Gilbert's smash hit, Lars' fastest high attacks whiff, and he'll be struck by the opponent. Unlike Gilbert's smash though, this isn't a one-size-fits-all scenario. This varies based on the character. So here, Lars can utilize this era of whiff space creation, letting his opponent attack first with a quick button and use various tools for counter hits, just like in the Gil Smash section of the video. And because of the startup frames are higher for some of Lars' moves here, your opponent's 10 frame automatically whiffs, even though both of you have technically pressed at the same time. You can also go from Flash Bullet into another Flash Bullet in the Circumvention. It will go underneath a higher attack and counter hit an enemy's slower button. But to be clear, if the enemy throws out a slower attack, and remember, Lars is +1, it opens up the door for you, in fact, to use Delta Slicer, or even something heavy framed like Elbow Corona if you note enemies want to get in on you with a powerful but slower button. And see if they overextend with a button and take advantage of it. Now to tackle that shift to silent entry when Flash Bullet hits. Lars is +9 here. Awesome attack advantage. Every option Lars has here breaks adversaries out of their Power Crush, except for Lars' Power Crush itself, if not properly timed. Don't delay your silent entry options if you have a read that your opponent will Power Crush. Even a moment of a moment is too much time for the crush to pull through and hit you. So be decisive here. And of course, Turbine Hook launches in this scenario. Lars' ground game can be devastating to his opponent, and yet the enemy has options to combat this. It's a separate video to cover all of it, but Flash Bullet counter hit into Lightning Thrust provides big damage. You can follow up with Rimfire, scouting for a counter hit launch against a wake-up attack. Using Turbine Hook as your follow-up weapon of choice in delaying the attack, Lars of course is placed in a crouched state, where you can keep your offense going on a Mashing Fighter's wake-up attack with Lightning Starter into all of those buttons previously mentioned. If you don't delay Turbine, then go into Lightning Starter, then right back into Turbine, you may counter hit launch that mashing opponent instead. Flash Bullet into Ejector flips enemies onto their stomach, where Stack Up is a good weapon of choice to use for extending your offense by shifting to silent entry once again. And if Stack Up counter hits an enemy's wake up attack, silent entry Lightning Thrust is guaranteed. So try these things out. Lars can be really tricky. However, quick rows and quick recovery can allow opponents to escape some of these options, so be aware. To cap this section off, you can still go into guaranteed follow-ups scoring Flash Bullet on counter hit and holding back, just to be safe if you want more defensive play. I know this is a lot of information. Jump around, come back to this video as needed. But I want you to be able to get into that bag, whichever way you see fit. Follow-ups here set up certain ground game tools, give your opponent a different look, or convince them that you're just a crazy Lars player pressing buttons. Imagine that. Again, tackle this as an open field for you to explore. Be aware, some of these options are more difficult to land consistently than others. And if none of these reasons have you using Flash Bullet yet, this move also works as a keep out tool, really upping the probability of earning that counter hit. Flash Bullet is easily steppable to the enemy's left, can catch enemies stepping right, but isn't hard to step no matter what. Even anchored by a blocked one jab, enemies can still get out of the way. And keep in mind, those who can parry limbs in this game cannot parry this move. That does not include Jin and Leroy. They can parry normal attacks, power crushings, and even heat bursts. So watch out for them boys. This strike is -11 on a blocking opponent, but with the threat of Lars shifting, they may hesitate to press buttons. But don't be surprised if not in Masher's Paradise. And as I said before, since Flash Bullet is a range finder, counter hit tool, you may not often score a normal hit on your opponent just moving around, unless you set up things appropriately to do so. That requiring knowing a string of theirs that after you block, gives them slow feet, and then they try to step. Or hitting them with something that nails their feet to the ground, like left-right combo, and again, they attempt to step after. See? As much as Lars can be touted as a mindless offensive machine, he can still be a thinking man's character just as much as any other. Now briefly, going through Flash Bullet blocked and shift into silent entry, Lars is -3. Not the most terrible disadvantage, but a disadvantage nonetheless. Of course, I've mentioned Electric Volley here, as I will continue to bring up this move where it is opportune, as some characters' fastest attack strings can knock Lars out of this power crush depending on how you arrive to its usage. But going into Volley from -3, Lars still has time to shred through faster strings. Also, at -3, Lars has time to leap over an opponent's down jab with Lightning Axle. Down jab usually a surefire way to stop all of Lars' silent entry options if the opponent has blocked the initial attacks to get there. And if you really like playing with your life, you are playing Lars after all. If you press nothing after Flash Bullet in this circumstance, delaying your next action in the enemy down jabs, the strike will whiff, allowing you to punish with Lars' silent entry attacks. But this is character specific. Some jabs will reach out and tag you here, others will not. Keep in mind, distance does play a role here. Flash Bullet block at too close a range will have Lars being hit too. Lightning Axle over down jab is really what you want to take away here. And when an enemy's junk punch naturally just doesn't reach our guy Lars here, with Flash Bullet blocked and shift. Take advantage of this if you notice your enemy junk punching a lot to nullify Lars. Block punishment is one of Lars' greatest strengths, allowing you to choose different paths for a mix, whether it leaves your enemies on their feet or introduces them to the ground. And this next move knocks them down. Death Mask, 4-2-4, 2 high strikes, starting at 12 frames. In order to achieve mastery piloting this character, you have to know what types of actions Lars can make his enemies pay for using. Even if you don't know the frames, memorizing the attack animations of opponents in practice mode and understanding when you block some of these moves, you can return fire with Death Mask and the enemy cannot block it, gives the same results as checking out frames. Establishing that, the only time you use this move as a beginner and even intermediate with Lars is when an enemy attack is -12 or higher and you want to get some great damage and set up ground game. Scout for Death Mask at the wall as well, as this string wall splits. That being a great addition, Death Mask is another informational move that tells you how your opponent likes to get off the ground. Here now are some ground game setups when Death Mask is applied. Dynamic entry rimfire against wake up mid, low, and spring attack. And unlike some of Lars' other moves that knock down the opponents, enemies can't kip up here. Quick recovery god move, and Lars can actually float them for a combo. Dynamic entry stack up is another great tool when the read is the opponent will stay on the ground. And they may very well choose to do so because they're afraid of one of Lars' best moves, Bow Shock. A move where even when the enemy blocks, Lars still gets to move first. We'll check out Bow Shock in depth, its strengths and weaknesses, some other time. But this move here, stack up, is another great attack you want to create as many ways as possible to operate. This is not a get-in tool or something you randomly just throw out. At -12 on block, enemies can make you pay for throwing out Death Mask haphazardly. It's a duckable string as well, and it doesn't gel one strike into the other, so the kick can be ducked all on its own. If the enemy presses in between the attacks, they will be hit. Death Mask is quite walkable to the enemy's left, can also be walked to their right, and anchored by a one jab, Death Mask is still walkable right, but will clip movement to the left. And if you get the first hit of this strike, you are guaranteed the second. But this move, up to intermediate stages, is a block punisher only. Remember that. We will stay on the subject of Lars' block punishment, blocking an enemy's attack and returning fire with something they cannot block. Let's say you don't want to knock an opposing fighter down and have a ground game mix-up, but leave them dead on their feet, forcing a mix while they stand. Charge factor, 4-2-1, shift to silent entry. 2 high attacks, starting at 12 frames, just like Death Mask. Unlike it though, with that shift to silent entry, Lars is +6. Good advantage, right up in your opponent's face, forcing them to make a decision. A training partner once said to me, playing Tekken is like having a second job. And labbing is a part of that job. Scout through some of these characters in the game, find that -12 or so, and divvy out charge factor. But the thing I love the most about this move upon hit, Lars' attack advantage is too great for enemies to power crush or heat burst their way out of Lars implementing lightning thrust. No power crush in the game can escape this action, and Yoshimitsu can't flash here. Parry is still possible though, like with Lee. Another place for Rising Storm if you scout this action reoccurring from an enemy. In seeing Lars in silent entry stance, opposing fighters may immediately duck, anticipating Turbine Hook, opening the door for not only Lightning Thrust, but again Rising Storm and Lightning Axle. Of course, if they just stay standing and attempt Power Crush, Turbine will counter hit launch them, as we've noted before. Rising Storm and Lightning Axle loses the Power Crush. But if the enemy says, forget it, doesn't want to play the Lars guessing game, and stand blocks, Lightning Axle forces them into crouch, and Delta Slicer or Sidestep Ark Blast are great tools to look for under this circumstance. Lightning Axle hitting the opponent will knock them down. Now you may be conditioned to silent entry rimfire against the wake up option, or if enemies just lay on the ground. However, opposing fighters can quick roll here and throw out a launcher to counter hit you. Into the Storm will alleviate this issue. I love pulling off this move right here in these circumstances. You should very much so remember this setup and use it. Charge factor is one of the best ways for Lars to get into his bag. And from there, use whatever weapon gets the job done. If you misjudge a punish or you're just late, Lars is at that disadvantage of -5. The Lars minigame isn't quite so real here anymore. But Electric Volley may still be able to save the day depending on what option your opponent uses. Implementing 4-2-1 and holding back, Lars won't shift into stance. He's safe to block at -6 and may catch an opponent throwing out something foolish he can take advantage of. Bait something out. Quick reconnaissance. How does my opponent like to play? The issue or challenge with this is, now you have to rely on defense. You checking to see how your opponent likes to play. They are also checking for what you know how to defend. The more hits in a string someone has. Jin, June, Brian, Eddie, or the more rare they are played. The burden of being knowledge checked falls upon you in this highly offensive game. So, as you familiarize yourself with the other fighters in the game, this will, if you pay attention, become easier to do. It's an opportunity, if you so choose, to sharpen your defensive skills in the game. If you want attack advantage, but don't want to mix the opponent from a stance, you can punish something in holding back. Lars is +5, and you're primed for counter hits. Think magnetic knee here, alert L, delta slicer, flash bullet. You can do ring current to go into a mix. Or something with a slower animation if you find the enemy respects that it's still your turn and just blocks. Too high attacks, charge factor can be ducked. Catch enemy stepping right, avoid it, if they step left. Here's a quick note to keep in mind when it comes to charge factor. Sometimes adversaries get confused and think the situation to deal with this string when they block it is the same as when they get hit, which of course does not share much crossover, and you can make them pay for not paying attention. Tekken vets will cite the difference and play accordingly, but with all this movement Lars has, they too may be confused now and then and press when you have attack advantage, thinking that their chosen action against you is not only the right counter move against Lars' attack, but mistakenly lulled into thinking they can press no matter what, which again isn't true. If used properly, Electric Volley is there to provide safety when opponents block, and Lightning Axle here to strip away those who parry. You may be able to abuse the hell out of this string if opponents, whether on hit or block, try to guess what Lars will do. That, coupled with Tekken oddities of being minus but still able to hit the opponent with certain stuff, can make this string seem overpowered. But this type of power is very much so character and attack string particular. There is an evasion quality to Lars dipping down into silent entry, no matter how he gets there. And this evasion is made more powerful with Lars delaying his inputs from stance. So charge factor, even on a blocking enemy like Kazuya, Lars can circumvent some of his high attacks. Flash punch combo can be turned into nothing here. I mean going into ejector without any delay. Flash punch is just plain evaded. But on Reina, Lars will be hit, seemingly because her hitbox for Flash Punch is lower than Kazuya's. Though still a high, she is shorter. An attack string on Jin, like left-right spinning hook, can be worked around and have Jin being worked. But these types of circumventions depend on the matchup, and to get the most out of it, do for the most part require delaying Lars' timing so the first hit of a high string whiffs. The killer of charge factor into silent entry and the enemy blocking it is a fast mid attack or dick jab to kill all options. Even Electric Volley. This is when you refer back to holding back to catch that down jab whiffing, and Ark Blast. And ejector comes back around again with Lars' built-in evasion tactics, as it can evade some of the down jab rules, depending on the character. In this move too, evades or fails to do so, depending on distance to the opponent. Quick recap and clarification. So, a fast, quick recovering mid-attack aside, start to build a mental stack of a few things here in regard to charge factor on block and shift. Down jabs that, no matter what, have the length to strike Lars, whether he presses while in stance or not. Junk punches that have range to hit Lars while in stance, but lose to ejector if it is pressed instantly as Lars goes into silent entry. Any other option against this type of down jab, like lightning axle or lightning thrust, will have Lars being hit. in those who have a T-Rex arm dick jab that will not hit Lars at all in the evasive shift of silent entry, when Lars delays his button, like with Jin and Dragunov here. For obvious time reasons and admitted nuance of these situations, these three categories I will leave to you to lab, test out, maybe try out in player match. This is a special situation. Do not rely on this as a one-all, be-all answer. And above all else, when you come across this situation and recognize it, make them pay. As I've referenced a few times now, a stand blocking opponent can be troublesome. Lars wants his opponent to attack so he can catch them whiffing, counter hit them, or punish them. And he has some great mids to do all this with, but his low attack game from just standing there, no stance involved, leaves something to be desired. Ark Combination is the release valve to alleviate Lars' lack of low pressure without putting his full life on the line as much as other options. This is a release valve for his lack of pressure in general. Low high, fast for a low attack, down back 1-3, impacting at 17 frames. Enemies cannot see this coming. They have to make a read that you're going to do it instead. Ark Combination naturally combos, meaning that if you get the first hit, you get the second. This move goes underneath high strikes of an attacking enemy. In performing Ark Combination and pressing down, Lars shifts to limited entry, where remember, both Blasting Smack and Rising Force will also evade high attacks. Enemies who finish their attack strings and don't move around too much. In fact, they just stand block or attempt to back away. You can also do some quick recon here and watch their movement after they attack. See if they sidestep and then apply Ark Com as they come to a standstill. Ark Combination is one of Lars' conditioning tools. Though divvying out a meager 19 damage, because it's unseeable, this move can be annoying as hell, placing in the mind of the enemy that if they don't start ducking, they will experience this move over and over again. This also is a move to go for after alert L blocked or left-right com is blocked, or strikes that are -1 or -3. As Lars has time for Ark Combo to duck under high attack and score a hit. Shifting to limited entry stance and holding down back, Lars will exit out of the stance quicker and you can junk punch against the high attack. Or holding down or down back, whichever one you like, apply double smack against the high strike as well. And waiting that little sec for Lars to switch over to crouch state, Lightning Starter finds more usage as it can evade high attacks as well, allowing Lars to exploit his shifting mixes. Ark Com landing and pressing down is -1 on hit. Disadvantage for Lars in fact, a small one that all of those options we just went over can circumvent. But not all moves will be able to do so. Ark Combo into While Rising 4, Shell Smash, will have Lars being hit by an enemy's high strike. Here again, Lars invites his opponent to play a game of risk, as Lars can be knocked out of all of his high evasion options by an enemy's fast mid attack. Though Lightning Starter can evade Lydia's and Heihachi's 13 frame mid in an oddball kind of way by delaying the impact, that is particular to those matchups and aren't foolproof from getting hit. Keep in mind, the vast majority of the cast 13-frame mids will hit you. And while Rising 4 is actually quicker than the vast majority of enemy mids and will hit them. Making Cell Smash, safe from enemies attempting to launch you with something, and will float hop kicks as well for a combo. Quick recap. So, the game here is Ark Calm into high crushing moves. Enemies can throw a mid to counter this. Enemies throwing out that mid after Ark Calm hits, Lars can roll out Cell Smash against them, which of course they can beat with a high that Lars can beat with those high crushing moves. This is the rock, paper, scissors type of game here, but you can rescind the invitation and not play at all. At -1 on hit, Lars of course is safe to block and may bait out an overreaction from an enemy he can take advantage of and punish. Which is exactly what Lars wants to do. In regards to high evasion tools Lars has after Ark Combination, adversaries armed with hop kicks may also attempt them here. So Ark Calm into holding back is another way to deal with hop kicks or bait something else out as well. Another way to look at this whole thing is, you don't have to press down with Ark Calm hitting. Lars is still -1. Small disadvantage. Remember, you can challenge with your fast highs here if you scouted or suspect a mid attack in return. Opposing forces scouting you correctly, they conduct the first hit of the string, the high will whiff, and they can launch you. This will happen more often with overusage. Opposing fighter will throw out a safe string just to duck and catch you slipping. That being said, there's a risky and cheeky thing you can attempt here. If the enemy doesn't parry, they duck the low punch because they want to hide a pass by so they can launch you. But you don't throw out the high. You go for power spike instead. You can catch them pressing. Even if you hit them, they just stand there. A moment to realize you didn't throw out the high, they think, okay, I'll take my turn now, and then you score power spike as a counter hit. This all depends on how comfortable you are taking risk. And if I said it once, I'll say it 1,000 times. You do play Lars after all. Overall, this move, if nothing else, can make an enemy start ducking, and that's exactly what we want them to do. So Lars can crack open his offense with moves like this next on our list. We will now explore one of Lars' best mid-launching tools, Ark Blast, forward 1+2. 15 frames, a good median speed for a launcher. Peculiar hit range that makes the move seem mercurial in terms of its hitbox. Sometimes it's there, and sometimes it's just not there. Even still, this might be Lars' easiest access launcher with minimal risk. An enemy finishes a string and ducks, which I'm finding at the time of this recording, a good chunk of enemies do in range. They do this to catch you with a wild rising move that circumvents high attacks, or to wait until your high string has an opening to hit you with something. So, use Ark Blast here. Of course, you would have a read on this, that you suspect they'll duck after a string. Also after something like tactical sword blocked, and you note the enemy is prone to junk punch in this forced crouch situation. Sidestep Ark Blast or backdash Ark Blast. Same goes for squashing enemies down with lightning axle. This must be done with a steady and quick hand though from here. Setting a dummy to block all and punish in practice mode and choosing crouch punishment option 7 will aid you greatly in attaining the proper sidestep Ark Blast timing. Another use for Ark Blast is not as a keep out tool, but keep opposing fighters from being right next to Lars' tool, like a phone booth away. Looking at this move in a different way, upon a lull in the action, an enemy's approach with something, and you simply get your move off first. You can hunt for Ark Blast in this way. Lars can really be a master of the mid-range, choosing to opt to whiff punish buttons that waft by his nose with Ark Blast over Delta. The gamble here is Delta is faster and has more hits, more chances to hit the opponent, while Ark Blast is hit or miss, but provides a launcher. Downward one blocked, backdash, or sidestepping into Ark Blast also gives this move a usage path. Same for the first strike of the hyperbolically named Volcanic Lightning, giving this relic of a move some type of utility, as it has some pretty good pushback. Ark Blast is -13 on a blocking opponent, granting them access to one of their better attacks in an advantageous situation for them. Still though, they can't launch you. This launcher is a mild risk going into it with plus frames. But noticing, no matter what, your opponent just never stops pressing buttons, definitely apply it. And keep in mind, not every move blocked by the opponent grants Lars the right to a backdash. And even if you attain the backdash, Ark Blast hitting before an enemy string depends on how far and fast their attacks reach out. So it's back to rule number 1. Know your enemy when you decide to apply this backdash Ark Blast method, supplementing with Delta when and where as needed. Alright, this move doesn't have any tracking whatsoever. Steppable, walkable, left and right. Taking a look at Lars' Cool Kid version of Hadouken hands. This move can be parried for those who are inclined. And again, watch the range of this strike. Sometimes it can make you feel you're right up next to your opponent, yet a million miles away. Some of your opponents may have figured out over the years of playing against him, or are just quite comfortable with stand blocking, especially against Lars, that tons of Lars' best stuff are singular mid strikes or mid attack strings. Shadow Cutter and Arc combination offering paths to chop down at your opponent, though albeit with risk. Here is another low attack that provides great power for Lars, along with great risk. Cross Transistor, double forward 4-2. Low high, 21 frames that combos, and is all but unseeable to the naked eye. It covers some range, and Lars is +9 on hit, great attack advantage, while shifting into dynamic entry stance. with those advantage frames tagging along with whatever option he chooses from this stance, setting up another guessing game for Lars. This can be powerful. A cross between how much respect your opponent is giving you, something along the lines of, "Hey Lars, you hit me. I'm aware it's still your turn. You have attack advantage. I'm not going to take any chances in challenge. I am just going to stand here and block." A cross between that line of thinking and also just stand blocking to strip away Lars' mix game or counter hit game. That's when this low strike is effective. You've scored a hit and you want to keep your offense going against the stand blocking, backing away opponent. You can also scout for this move when there's a lull in the action. The fighters jockeying for position and assessing each other. There is a range Lars can cover with this move that you can use to your advantage, moving in on a frigid opponent or an enemy just waiting to see you whiff something so they can launch you. Whatever circumstance you found you scored a hit with this move, hell, you might be a wild child just throwing this shit out just because. But however you get there, remember Cross Transistor is a beautiful +9 on hit, with Lars in his opponent's face in dynamic entry stance. Enemies cannot power crush or heat burst their way out of Into the Storm here, nor break a throw if caught going for these options. You may find a good amount of King players choose these options often, which is why King's armor moves are spread throughout this guide. Opposing fighters may mistakenly be under the impression that they can junk punch here against all Lars options or just looking to evade double barrel. Either way, rim fire on deck will land for a counter hit. And bow shock will go over the dick jab. Bow shock, a slow option that can be jabbed out even with +9 attack advantage. Non-mashing enemies, if you can find one, may elect to just, you guessed it, stand block. Well, Lars will gain attack advantage on block, shift to silent entry, and they'll have to guess what happens next, all over. Your fastest option here is double barrel. That elbow by itself is +1 on a blocking opponent. That teeny advantage is enough for Lars to hunt for Delta Slicer. Any way you find yourself in dynamic entry stance, this little setup is the fastest thing you can do. So always be on the lookout to serve this up. Everyone in this game has 50-50s. Lars is still a premier mix character. So mix a lot. This move, for all intents and purposes, is unseeable, or damn near as close to it in this game as you can get. But Lars' health bar gets melted down when this move is blocked. Experienced fighters and habitual duckers alike will turtle up after finishing their attack strings, as I mentioned before. They'll do this only for a moment to attempt to block a low, parry it, or duck a high before attacking or backdashing. So be careful to observe as quickly as possible how your opponent likes to move after attacking you. Do they duck, dick jab, while rising, or move away? I'm going to press on this again. The ones that want some immediate space after you block their strikes, the ones that backdash away. That's when you apply Cross Transistor. Another thing to watch out for is too long a pause in the action gives enemies more time to fill out, to prepare for, to read this move. Remember, disguise this behind plus frames and your opponent respecting those frames when using cross transistor. Double pulse, Lars' old and busted hell sweep, leaves Lars in a state of disadvantage, -3 after it hits, but it divvies out a bit more damage and allows Lars to return to fight ready stance, so he won't be vulnerable to an enemy's rage art if their health is low. Though even if enemies mash out their rage art after cross transistor hits, they will be at too much of an animation disadvantage for the attack to trigger against options like Into the Storm and Double Barrel. A funny thing of if you try to grab them and they mash out rage art, they may end up accidentally breaking the grab. All that going over, make sure to use double pulse to bait out that rage art on enemies about to die. Cross transistor step ability really has range tied to it. Right up close, it's quite walkable left and right. Backdash length away, Lars' punch can catch those walking to the right, and the whole move can clip enemies moving left. Double pulse misses completely left and right up close. A backdash away, enemies can still evade moving right, though the kick has a chance to clip them moving left. Long ass guide. Thank you for tuning in, and I hope I've provided a slew of things for you to consider when piloting this character and tactics to implement. We're still just getting started with what this character can do, believe it or not. Stick with him now, and you will eventually unlock all of his power. And keep lion-hearted out there in the mean streets of Rate. You do play the Lion of the Rebellion after all. The Demon. And remember, a good string is like a good song. No matter how many times you repeat it, it's just as good as it was the first time. Laters.
I keep God first. I see evil, when I converse. Not today, say. This how God works. Play my position, what is given with no concerns.